The air in the Grand Celestial Ballroom smelled of power, a thick layered scent of imported orchids, vintage scotch, and the metallic tang of ambition that clung to the tailored suits of the men inside. Below that, the humbler notes, sizzling wagyu on hot stones, truffle oil, and the sharp, clean scent of the starched linen Zola carried. For most people, it was the smell of unattainable luxury. For Zola, it mostly smelled like survival. Her black uniform was a void in the glittering expanse of the gala, a simple dress, a crisp white apron. It was a costume of invisibility, designed to blend into the background, to be a pair of hands without a face. Her hair, a crown of intricate braids, was pinned back with severe discipline. Her hands, though, were the tell. Long, graceful fingers, nails kept short and practical. But they moved with a preternatural stillness, a practiced economy that spoke of something other than carrying trays of champagne. They were the hands of an analyst, a strategist, hands that had once danced over encrypted keyboards and dissected financial reports that could topple governments. Tonight, they were simply ensuring the flutes didn't clink. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the room not as a servant's would, but as a threat assessor's. She clocked the exits, the security placements, the subtle shift in a bodyguard's posture that betrayed the location of his charge. Old habits, useless now. They didn't pay the bills. Maya's tuition did, specifically the third of 8 installments for her medical school program, $18,432. The number was seared into Zola's mind, a constant low-grade hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. That number was why she was here, balancing canapes instead of portfolios. It was why she tolerated the cloying condescension of the wealthy and the frantic sweat of her superiors. Sacrifice, not weakness. A shield for her sister's future, forged from her own quiet dignity. A tremor of anxiety rippled through the catering staff, a disturbance in the force. Mr. Choi, the manager, scurried from the kitchens, his face pale and slick with perspiration. He wrung his hands, his knuckles white. "Listen up!" he hissed, his voice a frantic whisper that barely carried over the string quartet. "Chairman Park's son is on his way up. Park Min-jun. You know the drill. Eyes down, no mistakes. He finds fault for sport. Do not give him a reason. Do you understand? Whatever he asks for, you get it. Whatever he says, you hear nothing." Zola felt a familiar coldness settle in her stomach. Park Min-jun. She knew the name not from the society pages, but from the redacted files and whispered warnings of another life. A life where her foster father, Kim Dae-jung, had been a player in a very different, far more dangerous game. Chairman Park had been his rival, a man who built his empire on foundations of corruption and ruthlessness. And his son, Min-jun, was said to be a cruder, more volatile echo of the father. She gave a slight deferential nod along with the other waitstaff, her face a neutral mask. Inside, she recalibrated. An annoyance had just become a threat. She subtly shifted her position, putting 2 marble pillars between her and the main entrance. Invisibility was her only armor. As she moved, her gaze snagged on a man in the far corner of the room, seated alone at a small table. He was older, with a face like a weathered landscape, and he had been watching the room with a quiet, mist-nothing intensity. He'd been a regular at the hotel's private lounge where she sometimes worked, a silent figure who drank barley tea and read thick newspapers. He had once caught her eye after a particularly nasty guest had berated her, and he'd given her a slow, deliberate nod. A nod of recognition? Of what, she wasn't sure. Uncle Kim had taught her to notice such men, the ones who held their power in stillness, not volume. She filed him away. An anomaly. The energy in the room shifted, the ambient chatter dipping for a fraction of a second. Heads turned. The doors to the ballroom swung open, held by 2 stone-faced guards. Park Min-jun did not walk in. He made an entrance. Flanked by 3 sycophantic young men in suits a little too flashy, he strode into the room with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no. His suit was a garish plaid, his hair artfully disheveled. A diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist glittered with every expansive gesture. A piece that could have paid for Maya's entire education, with enough left over for a house. He was loud, his laughter a percussive bark that sliced through the elegant music. He was already drunk. Zola kept her head down, her focus locked on a tray of empty glasses. Her job was to be furniture. She collected the glasses, her movements fluid and silent, and turned toward the kitchens. A wall of expensive cologne and entitlement blocked her path. "Hey, you!" The voice was slurred, arrogant. Zola froze, not looking up. She knew without seeing that Park Min-jun was speaking to her. "I need a drink, scotch, and not the garbage they're pouring for these peasants," he said, waving a dismissive hand at the surrounding millionaires. "The good stuff." "Yes, sir," Zola murmured, her eyes fixed on the third button of his ridiculous jacket. She turned to go, but he stepped in front of her again. One of his friends snickered. Min-jun's eyes, bloodshot and cruel, raked over her. It was the look of a boy pulling the wings off a fly. He wanted an audience. He wanted a reaction. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he snapped. Slowly, deliberately, Zola lifted her head. She met his gaze, her own expression perfectly, infuriatingly neutral. She held it for a beat longer than necessary, a microscopic act of defiance no one but he would feel. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He leaned in, his breath sour with alcohol. "What's your name?" "I'm part of the catering staff, sir." An answer that was not an answer. He smirked, a nasty, knowing expression. He turned to his friends and said something in rapid, colloquial Korean, the language of the back alleys of Seoul, not its boardrooms. The words were a cascade of casual cruelty. "Look at this black ghost," he slurred, the Korean words sharp and ugly. "Staring like she has a soul. Do you think they even understand what we're saying? Probably just hears barking." His friends roared with laughter. Zola's posture did not change. Her expression remained placid. But inside, something ancient and cold began to uncoil. It was the language of her childhood, the language Uncle Kim had spoken to her over steaming bowls of jjigae. He was using the very cadence, the very slang she had grown up with, twisting it into a weapon against her. He assumed it was a wall between them. He had no idea it was a bridge she could walk across at any time. She held her stillness. 3 seconds. That was the rule Uncle Kim had taught her. When provoked, give yourself 3 seconds. 1 to feel the anger, 1 to assess the situation, 1 to choose your response, 1, the heat of fury, the familiar sting of being unseen, unheard, dehumanized. 2, the room, the witnesses, Mr. Choi's terrified face, the weight of Maya's tuition. The cost of reaction was too high. The cost of inaction was a piece of her soul. 3, she chose survival, for now. She gave a slight bow, a gesture of subservience that felt like swallowing glass. "Your scotch, sir. I will retrieve it immediately." Her compliance seemed to bore him. The game was no fun if the toy didn't break. He sighed dramatically. "Forget it. Get me some tea. Barley tea. Hot." He emphasized the last word, his eyes glittering with a new, malicious idea. "Yes, sir." She retreated to the service station, her movements still measured, still calm. Her hands were perfectly steady as she poured the steaming water over the roasted barley. The fragrant, earthy scent filled the air, a scent of home, of safety, a scent he was about to desecrate. She returned with the delicate porcelain cup and saucer. As she approached, Min-jun deliberately stuck out his foot. It was a clumsy, obvious motion. Zola saw it, of course. She could have avoided it with a simple sidestep. But as she registered the move, she also registered the look on his face, a smug, eager anticipation. He wanted her to stumble. He wanted her to spill. He wanted a show. And in that split second, she made a different calculation. Let him have his show. Let him believe he had won. Let him create the very incident that would become his undoing. Her foot caught his, the tray tilted. But her reflexes, honed by a different kind of training, were too good. She managed to save the saucer, but the cup of boiling tea tipped, its contents splashing directly onto her left forearm. Pain, white-hot and immediate, lanced up her arm. It was a shocking, searing agony. Her training screamed at her to lock down, to show nothing. Her body screamed in protest. For a single shattering moment, her mask slipped. A sharp intake of breath, a tightening of her jaw. Min-jun burst out laughing. "Clumsy bitch!" he roared, loud enough for the nearby tables to turn and stare. "You've ruined my shoes! And this suit! Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" He hadn't a drop on him. The tea was all on her skin, blistering red and angry. The room went quiet. The music faltered. Everyone saw the spilled tea, the jeering air, the black waitress standing perfectly still, her arms steaming slightly, her face once again a blank canvas. They saw and they looked away. Mr. Choi was frozen in place, a statue of terrified impotence. "Get her out of here," Minjun commanded, waving a dismissive hand at a nearby hotel security guard. "She's incompetent. I don't want to look at her." The guard, a burly man with a face devoid of empathy, moved toward her. He saw her not as a person who had just been burned, but as a problem to be removed. "Ma'am, you need to come with me," he said, his voice flat. Zola didn't move. She looked at Minjun. She looked at his laughing friends. She looked at the averted eyes of the wealthy guests. She catalogued every face, every cowardly glance. The pain in her arm was a distant fire. A new, colder fire was burning in her chest. The guard put a hand on her uninjured arm. His grip was firm, bruising. "Let's go, now." He began to pull her, marching her unceremoniously across the polished marble floor, past the gawking guests, past the horrified staff. She didn't struggle. She walked with him, her back ramrod straight, her head held high. It was not a walk of shame. It was a walk of calculation, a strategic retreat. He shoved her through the service doors, into the cold, concrete hallway beyond. The heavy door swung shut, muffling the sounds of the party. "Stay out," the guard grunted, before turning and disappearing back into the ballroom. Zola stood in the echoing silence of the corridor, the smell of grease and disinfectant replacing the perfume of orchids and money. She leaned against the cool wall, finally allowing her body to react. A wave of nausea and pain washed over her. She cradled her arm, looking at the angry red welt that was already beginning to blister. The skin was ruined, but beneath the pain, a decision had been made. A line had been crossed. He hadn't just humiliated her. He hadn't just hurt her. He had done it in Korean. He had used the language of her heart, of her family, to call her a ghost. He had tried to erase her. He would learn that ghosts can haunt. Inside the ballroom, the incident was already being forgotten, a minor ripple in a sea of champagne. Park Min-jun was holding court, regaling his friends with an exaggerated version of the story. 10 minutes later, the main doors opened again. This time, there was no fanfare, just a shift in the room's gravity. Kwon Ji-hoon entered. He moved with a predatory grace, a man completely at home in his own skin, in his own power. He was flanked by two men in dark, impeccable suits who moved in perfect, silent sync with him. They weren't bodyguards. They were extensions of his will. The air around them was 20 degrees colder. The ambient chatter near the door simply ceased as he passed. People didn't stare. They looked down, away, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. Ji-hoon was a vision of controlled lethality. His suit was a simple dark charcoal, but it fit his powerful frame in a way that spoke of thousands of dollars and countless hours with a master tailor. His hair was black, cut short and neat. On his wrist was a simple Patek Philippe watch, an object so understated and expensive, it was an insult to Min-jun's flashy diamonds. It was a watch that could buy a city block. His eyes, however, were his most dangerous feature. They were cold, calculating, and missed nothing. They were the last thing you saw. He ignored the host trying to greet him, his gaze sweeping the room with an unnerving purpose. He spotted Park Min-jun and his coterie of hyenas. His expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in the depths of his eyes. His gaze continued its sweep, passing over the staff. He frowned. He stopped the sweating, trembling Mr. Choi with a single raised finger. Ji-hoon's voice, when he spoke, was a low murmur, yet it cut through the room like a shard of ice. His English was perfect, unaccented. "There was a waitress," he began, his tone deceptively mild. "A black woman, with her hair braided. She was here a moment ago." Mr. Choi started sweating profusely. "Sir, there was a small accident, a spill. It was handled." Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed. They were the eyes of a wolf assessing a sick deer. "That wasn't my question." A beat of absolute silence. "I asked where she went." The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken consequence. Park Min-jun, overhearing, sauntered over, a drunken swagger in his step. "Ah, Ji-hoon Hyung," he slurred, attempting a familiar tone that was not earned. "Don't worry about her. Just some clumsy help. I had her removed. She was disturbing the guests. Ji-hoon slowly turned his head to look at Min-jun. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The authority he radiated was absolute. You had her removed, he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a fact he would be dealing with shortly. He looked back at the terrified manager. Where? The service corridor, sir. Outside. Ji-hoon gave a nearly imperceptible nod to one of his men, who immediately peeled off and headed for the service doors. Without another word to Min-jun or the manager, Ji-hoon turned and walked toward a private suite at the far end of the ballroom, the remaining man falling into step behind him. The message was clear. The conversation was over. The judgment was pending. Zola was running cold water over her arm at a utility sink when the service door opened. She tensed, expecting the guard to return to harass her further. Instead, it was a man in a suit that cost more than her car. He stopped, his face impassive, and looked at her arm. Mr. Kwon would like a word, he said. His voice was neutral, but it was not a request. He gestured toward the main corridor. Zola's mind raced. Kwon. She knew that name too. Kwon Ji-hoon, the heir to the Phoenix Syndicate, a rival organization to the parks, but one with a reputation for a colder, more disciplined brand of business. Uncle Kim had respected the elder Kwon. He'd called him a man of honor, as much as any man in their world could be. She turned off the water, her burn throbbing in the sudden silence. She had no good options. Staying here meant being fired and possibly blacklisted. Going with him meant stepping into a world she had fought for years to leave behind. She looked at the man's expectant face. Survival meant adapting. Lead the way. He led her not back to the ballroom, but down a quiet, carpeted hallway to a private suite. He opened the door and stood aside. Kwon Ji-hoon was standing by the window, looking down at the glittering city lights. He turned as she entered. His eyes immediately went to her arm. He gestured to a plush armchair. Sit. She remained standing. I'm fine. His gaze held hers. It was like being weighed and measured on a celestial scale. That was not a request. Sit down. This time she obeyed, perching on the edge of the expensive chair. He crossed the room to a minibar, retrieved a first aid kit, and walked back to her. He knelt, not in supplication, but with the detached efficiency of a field medic. He opened a sterile burn cream and an antiseptic wipe. Give me your arm. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended it. His touch was surprisingly gentle, clinical. He cleaned the wound with a focus that was absolute, his movements precise. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken questions. He was a man who commanded legions, and he was kneeling on the floor, tending to a waitress's burn. It didn't make sense. Park Min-jun is a rabid dog, he said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't looking at her, his focus entirely on dressing the wound. And he needs to be put down. Zola said nothing. She knew this was a test. He finished wrapping her arm in a clean white bandage. The professional sterile covering was a stark contrast to her simple uniform. He rose to his feet, looking down at her. I have a problem, he continued. Min-jun is a liability to his father, and therefore a problem for me. He's been making unauthorized deals. I need to know with whom. He's arrogant. He won't talk to me or my men. He paused, his eyes boring into hers. But he might talk in front of you. Zola understood immediately. He wanted to use her as scenery, the invisible waitress, the black ghost who understands nothing. You want me to serve him tea again? The words were out before she could stop them, colder than she intended. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. Something like that. Before she could answer, the door opened. Ji-hoon's other man entered, followed by a struggling, protesting Park Min-jun. His face flushed with anger and confusion. What is the meaning of this, Hyung? You can't just drag me out of a party. Ji-hoon ignored him, his gaze fixed on Zola. A pot of barley tea, if you would. It was an order, but it was also the key to a door she hadn't realized was locked. This was the stage. He was offering her the stage. Zola rose. She gave a slight deferential bow. Yes, sir. As she walked to the small kitchenette in the suite, she could feel Min-jun's dismissive glare on her back. She prepared the tea with the same deliberate calm as before. The scent of the barley filled the suite. Her heart was a cold, steady drum. She placed the tray on the table between the two men. Minjun scoffed, looking at her bandaged arm with contempt. "Still clumsy, I see," he sneered. Ji-hoon leaned forward, pouring 2 cups. He pushed one toward Minjun. His voice was dangerously soft. "I hear you were at the Incheon docks last Tuesday, meeting with the Viper." Minjun laughed, a high, nervous sound. He took a sip of tea and switched to Korean, a thick, mocking Busan dialect, the dialect of the city's toughest criminals. He thought he was being clever, excluding everyone. "Hyung Nim, your sources are old," he said, leaning back with a smug grin. "The docks are for fishermen and fools. I was playing golf with Councilman Kim. You can ask him. Business is good. Father is happy." He was lying, and he was using the language of her youth to do it. Zola stood by the wall, a silent statue in a black uniform. Ji-hoon glanced at her, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. The gambit had failed. Minjun was too guarded. This was the moment, the precipice, Maya's tuition, the life she'd built, the safety of obscurity, and the memory of Uncle Kim's voice. "Dignity, Zolia, is the one thing they can't take. You can only give it away." She took a slow breath. She had felt the anger. She had assessed the situation. Now she would choose. She took one step forward. The sound of her shoe on the carpet was a thunderclap in the silent room. Minjun looked at her, annoyed at the interruption. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, measured, and flowed with the same gritty Busan-inflected Korean he had just used. But hers was more fluid, more authentic, more dangerous. "He's lying," she said. The words dropped into the silence like stones into a deep well. Minjun froze, his cup halfway to his lips. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning, abject horror. Zola's gaze was cold as steel. She looked directly at him, the deferential mask gone, replaced by something hard and absolute. Her posture shifted, her shoulders straightened, her spine aligning into a column of pure, unadulterated command. She was no longer a waitress. She was a judge. She continued in the same dialect, her tone dripping with contempt. "You weren't at the docks, and you weren't playing golf. You were in a back room at the Songdo Turtle, meeting with the Sunhee faction. You offered them a piece of the port logistics contract, your father's contract." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I imagine Chairman Park would be very interested to know you're carving up his empire to pay your gambling debts to his oldest rivals." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a shattered world. Park Minjun's face had gone from flushed red to a pasty, sickly white. The color drained from his lips. A fine tremor started in his hand, rattling the porcelain cup against its saucer. He looked from Zola to Ji-hoon and back again, his mind refusing to process what was happening. The ghost could speak, and it spoke his language. It spoke his secrets. Kwon Ji-hoon didn't move a muscle. He simply watched her. The cold calculation in his eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. A flicker of shock, quickly suppressed, followed by a deep, profound recognition. He was not looking at a waitress. He was looking at a weapon. Minjun finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic squeak. Who are you?" Zola held his gaze. She gave him no quarter. She delivered the final, devastating blow in English for Ji-hoon's benefit. A mic drop of quiet declaration. "Just a waitress," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "with good ears." After Minjun had been escorted out of the room, limp with terror and stripped of all his bluster, a new kind of silence settled between Zola and Ji-hoon. It was a silence of recalibration, of shifting power dynamics. He finally broke it. "Kim Dae-jung." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, an answer. "He was my foster father," Zola confirmed. She stood by the window, her bandaged arm a stark white slash against her black uniform. She was no longer looking at the city as a panorama of lights, but as a grid of assets and threats. He ran the most sophisticated financial intelligence network in the Jopak world for a decade, Ji-hoon mused, his voice holding a note of respect. Then he vanished. Everyone assumed Park had him killed. "He retired," Zola said. "He wanted a different life for me." The grief was a dull, familiar ache. He'd died of a heart attack 2 years ago, peaceful in his bed. A quiet end for a man who had lived such a loud life. He had left her with a sharp mind, a fluency in the language of his world, and a trust fund she couldn't touch until she was 30. His final attempt to keep her out of the life, a life she was now stepping back into. His network must have been extensive, Ji-hoon probed, watching her carefully. He taught me how to map the flow of money, Zola countered, turning from the window to face him. He believed all power leaves a paper trail. The Parks are careless. Min-jun is a fire hose of incriminating data. His corruption isn't a secret, it's a business model. But it's all tangled up in legitimate enterprises. To cut out the cancer, you need a surgeon who knows the anatomy. This was it. The negotiation. He had the muscle, the infrastructure, the reach. He could provide the platform, but she had the scalpel. "What do you want?" he asked. It was the most important question he could ask. It was an acknowledgement of her value. "First, my sister," Zola stated, her voice unwavering. "Maya, she's at Yonsei Medical. I want her protected, invisibly, not with a platoon of your thugs sitting in a black car outside her dorm. I want a ghost detail, people who can see without being seen. I want her tuition and living expenses guaranteed through graduation and residency, placed in a blind trust. The money I make from this arrangement will go there." He nodded. "Done." "Second, Park Min-jun. I don't want him beaten in an alley. I want him dismantled. I want his reputation, his finances, and his future turned to ash. I want it to be public. I want everyone who watched him humiliate me to watch him fall." The cold fury was back, controlled and precise. "That can be arranged." "Third," she said, her voice dropping, "when this is over, I want his father's shipping logistics company. Not the whole conglomerate, just that. It's the heart of their illicit operations. I will gut it, clean it, and make it legitimate. It was the first company Uncle Kim lost to Chairman Park decades ago. I'm taking it back." Ji-hoon raised an eyebrow. It was an audacious demand. He had expected her to ask for money, for a new identity. She was asking for a kingdom. "That is a significant asset," he said slowly. "And I am a significant asset," she returned, without arrogance, simply stating a fact. "You can't get to the park's financial core. Your organizations have been at a stalemate for a generation. Your men see soldiers and territory. I see spreadsheets and wire transfers. I can give you the kill shot, not just on Min-jun, but the entire park infrastructure. In return, I take my father's legacy back. That is my price." He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching. She did not fidget. She did not look away. She was his equal, and they both knew it. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "You'll need resources, a secure workspace, full access to my network's data. And you," she added, "will follow my plan. Your men are a sledgehammer. I need a scalpel. When I tell you to move, you move. When I tell you to wait, you wait. This is an intelligence operation, not a street war." He walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. The air crackled between them. It was not romantic tension. It was the friction of two immense forces aligning, the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. "Welcome back to the game," Kwon Ji-hoon said. The next 2 weeks were a blur of encrypted data streams and sleepless nights. Ji-hoon had provided her with a sterile, high-tech apartment that was more command center than home. The panoramic windows were polarized, the network air-gapped, the silence absolute. For Zola, it felt more natural than the catering uniform ever had. She shed her old identity like a skin, the subservient posture melting away, replaced by the focused intensity of the analyst she had always been. She worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. Ji-hoon's data streams were a fire hose of raw intelligence, surveillance reports, informant chatter, financial records. It was a mountain of noise, but Zola had been trained by a master to find the signal. She mapped Min-jun's life onto a digital whiteboard, his decadent spending, his shell corporations, his network of corrupt officials. It was a sprawling web of filth, but she quickly identified the central artery, the charity galas, like the one where he had burned her. They weren't just parties, they were money laundering hubs, inflated art auction prices, fake donations skimming off the top. It was brazen, but she found something deeper, something darker, woven into the shipping manifests of his father's logistics company. Discrepancies, ghost containers. shipments of textiles from Southeast Asia that weighed far too much and were routed through tax-free zones with lax oversight. It wasn't just money he was moving, it was people. The realization hit her like a physical blow, the humiliation, the cruelty. It was all a sideshow. The real evil was hidden in plain sight, in the steel containers crossing the ocean under his family's name. As she dug deeper, she knew she needed more than digital records. She needed physical proof from inside the beast. Chairman Park's headquarters. "It's too risky," Ji-hoon said over the secure line. They spoke every 12 hours, his voice a calm anchor in her storm of data. "His security is biometric. My men can't get in." "Your men can't," Zola agreed, staring at the building's blueprints on her screen. "But a cleaner can. They use a third-party service. Low-level clearance, but they have access to the executive floors after hours. I can get in." "No," his voice was flat. "Absolute. It's out of the question. I will not have you exposed." This was the first test of their agreement. She took a breath. "Ji-hoon, you hired me for my expertise. This is it. Your sledgehammer will get caught. My scalpel won't. I've analyzed the security protocols. The weak point is human, not technical. They rotate cleaning staff frequently to prevent familiarity. I have a clean identity ready. I know the layout. I know the blind spots. This is my decision." She was not asking for permission. She was informing him of her plan. There was a long silence on the line. She could almost hear him weighing his instinct to protect against the cold logic of her strategy. "One of my people outside," he finally conceded. "Non-negotiable." "Fine," she agreed, "but they stay outside. This is a solo operation." 2 nights later, Zola was no longer an analyst or a waitress. She was Maria, a night shift cleaner, her hair hidden under a scarf, her body clad in a drab blue jumpsuit. She moved through the silent marble and glass monolith of Park Tower with the quiet efficiency she had once used in the ballroom. No one gave her a second glance. She was invisible again, but this time it was a weapon. She reached the executive floor. Her target was Min Jun's office. She used a miniature device to clone the RFID on the door, a trick Uncle Kim had called a necessary social skill. Inside, the office reeked of stale cigar smoke and arrogance. While her cleaning cart stood as a prop in the doorway, she moved to his computer. She didn't have his password, but she didn't need it. She plugged a small disguised USB key into the back of his machine. It was a keylogger and data scraper. It would take 10 minutes to copy the most recent files from his cache. 10 minutes, an eternity. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, was a potential threat. The minutes crawled by. The device's tiny light blinked green. Done. As she was about to retrieve it, she heard voices from the hallway. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Security. She was trapped. She looked around the office. No other exit. She ducked behind the massive mahogany desk just as the office door swung open. It wasn't security. It was Min Jun and his father, Chairman Park. "Getting sloppy," the chairman was saying, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was far more terrifying than his son's bluster. "This business with the Kwan family, the girl at the Gala, you create ripples. Ripples attract attention." "Father, it was nothing," Min Jun whined. "A piece of trash, and Kwan is posturing. He has nothing." Zola held her breath, pressed against the cold wood of the desk. She could smell the chairman's expensive cologne. "He has Kim Dae-jung's ghost," the chairman hissed. "That's what my sources are saying. Someone with Dae-jung's knowledge is advising him, and it started right after you made a scene with that waitress. Tell me, son, was there anything unusual about her?" Zola's blood ran cold. No, she was just some black girl, ignorant, mute. Chairman Park was silent for a moment. "I hope so, for your sake. Because if you brought this down on us because you couldn't control yourself over some nobody, I will feed you to the wolves myself." They left. Zola stayed crouched behind the desk for 5 full minutes, her body trembling with adrenaline. They knew. They didn't know who she was, but they knew what she was. The hunt was on. She retrieved the USB and slipped out of the office, her movements now urgent. She got out of the building without incident, melting back into the city's shadows. The data on the drive was the final nail in the coffin. Encrypted ledgers, communication logs with trafficking rings, offshore accounts, and something else, something that made Zola's stomach clench. A file containing a background check on a Yonsei medical student, Maya. There was a photo of her sister, smiling, walking out of a lecture hall, and a note. Leverage? The threat was no longer abstract. Minjun was planning to go after her sister. Zola's carefully constructed control shattered, replaced by a raw, primal fear. She called Ji-hoon. He's targeting Maya. He has a file on her. My men are on their way to her dorm now. Ji-hoon's voice was grim. We'll pull her out, take her somewhere safe. No! Zola's voice was sharp, cutting through his authority. That's what he wants. You send a squad of gangsters to her door. You confirm she's connected to you. You put a permanent target on her back for every rival you have. He wins. What's your alternative? He demanded. Let him get to her? We use his own plan against him. The file mentioned planting evidence. Drugs, a classic move. We get there first. Her mind was racing, the analyst taking over from the terrified sister. He'll use a proxy, some desperate student he's paying off. We need to know who. I need access to the campus security feeds. And I need a clean phone, untraceable, registered to a burner. Her plan was audacious, relying on social engineering and precise timing. Using the campus feeds Ji-hoon's hacker provided, Zola identified the student who had been loitering near Maya's dorm, a known low-level dealer. She used the burner phone to send an anonymous, encrypted text to the campus security chief, posing as a rival dealer. Junho in 2B is planning to frame a med student to get out of his own dealing charges. Check his room before he moves the stash. It was a gamble, but it was a smarter gamble than a firefight on a university campus. 2 hours later, a notification popped up on the security feed. Campus police were raiding the dealer's room. They found the drugs intended for Maya. The threat was neutralized before it even materialized. Zola had outthought him, not outfought him. She sat back, her body shaking with the aftermath of the adrenaline. She had protected her sister, on her own terms. A few days later, the stakes escalated again. Ji-hoon had requested a meeting with a neutral party, an old guard figure in their world, to present a portion of the evidence against Park and force him to rein in his son. The meeting was at a neutral location, a high-end traditional Korean restaurant known for its privacy. Ji-hoon insisted Zola be there. You see things I don't, he'd said. She was dressed in a simple, elegant dark dress, her hair pulled back. She looked like his associate, not his employee. They sat in a private room, the air thick with tension. Ji-hoon was laying out the case, his voice calm and reasonable. Zola wasn't listening to the words. She was watching the room. The waiter who brought the tea, his hands trembled slightly. The shoji screens, one was misaligned by a fraction of an inch. Her analyst's brain was screaming that something was wrong. The patterns were off. She scanned the reflections in the polished silver serving trays on a nearby cart, and then she saw it. A flicker of movement from an alcove behind Ji-hoon. A dark shape. The glint of metal. A suppressor. There was no time to shout. No time to explain. Action was the only language that mattered. In a single fluid motion, Zola launched herself from her seat. She didn't shove Ji-hoon. She tackled him, using her full body weight to drive him sideways, off his zabuton cushion and onto the tatami mat floor. A muffled thud echoed through the room, simultaneous with the splintering of wood. A bullet hole appeared in the wall, precisely where Ji-hoon's head had been a second before. Chaos erupted. Ji-hoon's men, posted outside, burst into the room, weapons drawn. The assassin, a man from the Sun-hee faction Min-jun had betrayed, was apprehended in the ensuing scuffle. Zola lay on the floor, half on top of Ji-hoon, her heart pounding against his chest. The smell of gunpowder and his clean, sharp scent filled her senses. He rolled them over, his body shielding hers, his eyes scanning the room for other threats. When it was clear the danger had passed, he looked down at her. His cold, calculating mask was gone. In its place was something raw, something unguarded, shock, awe, and a terrifying, profound gratitude. He had surrounded himself with the most dangerous men in Seoul, yet his life had just been saved by the waitress. He pushed a stray braid from her face, his touch hesitant, almost reverent. "You see things I don't," he whispered, echoing his own words back to her. In that moment, lying on the floor of a restaurant amid the wreckage of an assassination attempt, the alliance forged in fire and intellect was sealed in blood and trust. He had offered her protection. She had delivered it. Back in the command center, the adrenaline had faded, leaving a grim resolve. "He's out of control," Ji-hoon stated, pacing the room. "Min-jun has to be removed, now." "No," Zola said, her voice steady. She stood before the digital whiteboard, which was now a complex web of corporations, bank accounts, and shipping routes. "We don't just remove him, we remove the whole rotten tree, root and branch. Min-jun is just a symptom. His father is the disease. We end the House of Park, all of it." Ji-hoon stopped pacing. He looked at the board, at the intricate plan she had woven from whispers and secrets. It was audacious, brilliant, and terrifying. "This is your plan," he said, a statement of fact. "This is my war," she corrected him. "And it ends at the Park Industries annual shareholders meeting, in 3 days." The day of the shareholders meeting was cold and overcast, the sky the color of slate. It was a perfect day for a funeral. Zola looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger, and, at the same time, the most authentic version of herself she had ever seen. She wore a custom-made suit, a modern interpretation of a hanbok, the jacket cut from deep navy silk, sharp and severe, worn over wide-legged trousers. It was armor. Her braids were woven with a single silver thread, a stark contrast to her dark hair. Her face was a mask of calm, cold purpose. The burn on her arm had healed into a faint, silvery scar, a permanent reminder of the spark that had started this fire. Kwon Ji-hoon stood by the door, watching her. He was in his usual dark, impeccable suit, but today he seemed to be a shadow to her light. He was the resource. She was the weapon. He held out a heavy lacquered box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single hairpin, exquisitely carved from jade. It was an antique, a museum piece. "My mother's," he said, his voice quiet. She believed jade protects the wearer from harm. It was the closest he would ever come to saying, "Be safe." Zola took the pin, its surface cool and smooth against her skin. She slid it into the intricate knot of her braids. A symbolic object, a transfer of trust. She met his eyes in the reflection. "Protection is a two-way street." He gave a rare, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm counting on it." They walked into the Park Industries Tower, not through a service entrance, but through the grand front lobby. The air was thick with the same smell of money and power from the Gala, but today, Zola wore it like a perfume, not a burden. Ji-hoon was at her side, his presence a palpable force field. They weren't sneaking in. They were arriving. Their entrance into the main auditorium caused a stir. Whispers followed them down the aisle. "That's Kwon Ji-hoon. Who is that with him?" At the head of the room, on a raised dais, sat Chairman Park and his son, Min-jun. Zola watched as their eyes found her. She saw the exact moment of recognition, the flicker of confusion, the dawning horror. Chairman Park's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. Min-jun's went slack with disbelief, his mouth hanging slightly open. The waitress, the ghost, here, in his seat of power. Zola and Ji-hoon took their seats in the front row, in chairs reserved for major stakeholders. The nameplate on the table in front of her didn't say Zola, it said Representative Dajung Holdings. The meeting began, a tedious drone of financial reports and self-congratulatory speeches. Zola sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the table in front of her. She let them stew in their confusion, let them sweat. Finally, the chairman opened the floor to new business. Zola stood up. A hush fell over the room. All eyes were on her. "Chairman Park," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone. It carried to every corner of the auditorium. "I have a question regarding the company's risk exposure, specifically concerning your shipping logistics subsidiary." Chairman Park's eyes were slits of ice. "All relevant information is in the quarterly report. If you have a specific grievance, take it up with investor relations." "My grievance is specific," Zola said, her gaze sweeping over the board members. "I'm concerned that the company is vulnerable to asset seizure under international anti-trafficking statutes." A gasp rippled through the audience. Min-jun shot to his feet. "This is an outrage! Slander! Security! Remove this woman!" "Sit down, you fool!" his father hissed, yanking him back into his seat. Zola didn't wait for security. She held up a single data slate. I'm not making an accusation. I'm stating a fact. For the last 18 months, Park Logistics has been a primary transport partner for the Golden Triangle Syndicate. Ghost containers, falsified manifests. I have the wire transfers, the shipping routes, the account numbers, all originating from an office on this very floor. Her eyes locked on Min Jun, who looked like he was about to be physically ill. "These are lies!" Chairman Park thundered, his face purple with rage. "Fabricated nonsense from our competitors." "Is it?" Zola's voice dropped, becoming intimate, dangerous. "Then perhaps you can explain the $50 million transferred from a shell corporation in the Caymans to your son's personal accounts? The same shell corporation that received payment for the transport of textiles that never existed." She let the silence hang, a damning indictment. The board members were shifting in their seats, looking at each other, then at the Parks, with new, fearful eyes. Chairman Park looked at her, his expression a mask of pure hatred. "This is impossible. Who are you?" he snarled. "Who do you work for?" Zola allowed herself a small, cold smile. She walked slowly toward the dais, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She stopped directly in front of him, looking down on him from the floor as he sat on his throne. "You already know the answer to that," she said, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of generations. "Da Jung Holdings. You remember the name, don't you? The small tech firm you bankrupted 30 years ago to get your start." She leaned in closer. "My father was Kim Dae-jung." The name hit the chairman like a physical blow. The last vestiges of his composure crumbled. "As of 9 a.m. this morning," Zola continued, her voice a death knell, "Da Jung Holdings, which my father secretly retained through a series of international trusts, has acquired a controlling interest in your primary creditor bank. All of your corporate debt, Chairman, is now leveraged against an asset that I own. Your company is insolvent. Your empire is mine." She straightened up, her gaze sweeping over the stunned room before landing back on Min Jun. The final, visceral confrontation. "You asked me my name once," she said, her voice dropping to a conversational tone. "I believe you called me a ghost." She paused. "My name is Zola, and I'm here to collect." With a primal scream of rage and terror, Min Jun lunged, vaulting over the table, his hands reaching for her throat. He never made it. Ji-hoon's men materialized from the crowd, intercepting him in a blur of motion, pinning his arms behind his back. He struggled like a caged animal, spitting curses and threats. The confrontation was over. The victory was absolute. And only then, as Min Jun was being restrained and his father was slumping in his chair, a broken man, did the doors at the back of the auditorium swing open. Uniformed officers from the Financial Crimes Unit began to file in, their movements calm and methodical. They were not the cavalry. They were the cleanup crew. 6 months later, the boardroom smelled of glass, steel, and potential. Zola stood at the head of a long, polished table, her back to a panoramic window overlooking the Incheon port. The name on the door read, Da Jung Logistics, CEO. "The projections are too conservative," she said, pointing to a chart on the large screen. "We're not just cleaning up the old routes, we're creating new ones. Our proprietary tracking software gives us a security advantage no one else can offer. I want new proposals on my desk by Monday. Aggressive ones." The room was filled with new faces, young, sharp executives who looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was not just wearing the suit, she was commanding the boardroom. She was building something new from the ashes of the old. The meeting concluded. As her team filed out, a video call popped up on her screen. Maya's face, bright and smiling, filled the monitor. She was in her scrubs, a stethoscope slung around her neck. "Guess who just aced her cardiology practical?" Maya beamed. "Top of the class." "I never doubted it for a second," Zola said, a genuine warm smile spreading across her face. The weight of the world had been lifted, replaced by the simple, profound joy of seeing her sister thrive. They talked for a few minutes, about exams and hospital rounds, about nothing and everything. The threat was gone. The sacrifice had been worth it. After the call ended, Zola stood by the window, watching the massive container ships being loaded and unloaded by cranes that now belonged to her. The complex, beautiful dance of global commerce. Her dance. The door to her office opened silently. Kwon Ji-hoon walked in. He looked different here, in her world. The lethal edge was still there, but it was softer, shielded. He placed a single steaming cup of tea on the corner of her desk. The fragrant, earthy scent of roasted barley filled the air. It was a rare, single-origin blend, the kind Uncle Kim used to drink. He came to stand beside her at the window, their shoulders almost touching. They watched the ships in a comfortable silence. Uncle Kim would be proud, he said finally, using the familial term. Zola took a sip of the tea. It tasted like home. It tasted like victory. She looked at the man beside her, the dangerous protector who had become a trusted partner, the man who had seen her when she was invisible. She gave him a small, true smile, one that reached her eyes and lit them from within. He taught me to finish what I start. The past was a scar, but the future was a clean sheet of paper, a new empire to build, a new legacy to write. And for the first time in a long time, Zola felt like she was finally home. What would you do if the world only saw your uniform and never the person wearing it?